Okay, I have the honor today to introduce Rick Richmond, who's a longtime friend. I think we first met with Definity Genomics through the Syracuse University study. And as already spoken by Duncan, Rick is a serial entrepreneur. Now, that's not to be confused with a serial killer. In fact, this is just exactly the opposite. He's a serial builder. Okay? And Rick has been associated with the Rochester area for years with High Tech Rochester, which is a group that goes out and finds startup companies that need capital, that need to have information and experience to help them grow their businesses. So he has really provided a real service to the community. If you are asked to be entrepreneur in residence by a university like the University of Rochester, you know you have arrived in the entrepreneurial field. And that's what Rick is. He's an entrepreneur in residence. He's also, his latest challenge is a small company called Simpor, which he's going to talk about today. And he has added his experience and wealth of knowledge to helping that company grow. And he's going to tell us about that today. So Rick, first of all, thank you for agreeing to be on the dais today. And I know it's going to be a very enjoyable talk. I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the very nice introduction. I've been involved in a number of companies, startups, and I've been very fortunate to have teamed up with just tremendous people who really focus on what needs to get done and work toward building a company and building value. And it's an exciting thing. Rochester and this Western New York area are just wonderful places to be. I came to Rochester in '67, believe it or not, as a graduate student with the idea I'd stay only 3 years. And once my wife and I got here, we realized what a gem this area is. And after many opportunities to go elsewhere, we've always chosen to stay here and had a lot of fun doing it. Today I'm going to talk about two companies, and that's why you'll see both on the slide here, two of the companies I've been involved with. One is STS Biopolymers, and the other one is Simpor. And I'm interwoven in all of this is High Tech Rochester, which is part of the University of Rochester. David Hessler, the interim president, is in about the middle of the room, and it's a wonderful program, and it's helped a lot of young companies, including companies that I've been associated with. The reason for having both companies up there is that I want to talk about case studies for the two companies, and I can go from the beginning to the end in STS Biopolymers, and then I'll tie that in with where we are near the beginning now with Simpor. But we've gone through a number of challenges in taking STS Biopolymers from the beginning to selling it to Angiotech Pharmaceuticals, and we're now going through many of those same challenges with Simpor, and I'll tell you a little bit about how they interrelate, and also contrast one huge difference between the two, and that is that in the case of STS Biopolymers, there was a market need in search of a technology, and in the case of Simpor, it's a university technology in search of a market, and the two are radically different, and they change the way you approach the beginning of the company. Once you get it rolling, the challenges are quite the same. As you're probably all aware, there's a large gap between the technology and the marketplace. When we started STS Biopolymers, I was actually a partner, one of the part owners of a service company in the medical device industry, and we were challenged by one of our customers, Cook Industries, Cook Incorporated. Bill Cook himself, who is the patriarch of the company, this is the 4th largest medical device company in the world. Most people don't know of it because it's private. Bill Cook owns it. A wonderful guy. He came into our plant one day and he said, look, I've got a problem. We put Teflon on guide wires. We need a slipperier coating. We know you've been doing some chemistry work that might relate to that. Can you help us out? And a couple of my partners and I examined the problem. I'm a pseudoscientist, they are true scientists, and they tackled the problem and solved it, came up with a coating that's 10 times slipperier than Teflon. That meant that we could start this new company. It was an offshoot. So we had a lot of things going for us. We already had a base business to build from. We started a new company based on that. We already had a product. We had a market need to be fulfilled. We created a product around that based upon some technology that we had. So our challenge there was to develop the IP, protect the whole thing with patent applications, and then license it out to that customer, Cook in this case, that had identified the problem, but to do it in a way that allowed us to go out to the whole broad marketplace. And that was something we had to tackle and think through before we even signed our first license agreement with Cook. So the next challenge after that is breaking into the marketplace, and this is something that we're facing in the new venture, Simpor, now. And the approaches we've been taking, that we took, and the approach we're taking now is, first, try to hire really great people. The old adage that try to find people who are better than you are really applies. If you can find young, aggressive, bright people who want to build a business, that goes a long, long way. Don't find yes people, find no people. People who know, K-N-O-W, and people who can say no and tell you why, and then you can work through why you're doing things and what the best approach is. We found in STS Biopolymers that our best way to get the word out was to publish papers and to present at industry meetings that were attended by product developers in the medical device companies. And that led to leads. From that, we made direct calls and began the sales cycle, which sometimes lasted a few years. When you're in the medical device market, the regulatory aspects of it mean that people are very, very cautious, very slow. They work very hard to make sure everything is right, because if you're going to stick it in the patient, you don't want a problem later on. You want to make sure you've got it done right. The next challenge that goes back to what I was saying about licensing, and that is we were the primary investors, my partners and I, but we also we started to bring in outside investors along the way, and we wanted to maximize the value of what we had for them and for ourselves. So the strategy we came up with was to sell the coatings under licenses to new customers. And we did that in a very, very narrow fashion. For example, in the guide wire, we ended up working in 3 primary markets: stent coatings, catheter coatings, and guide wire coatings. And we sliced and diced the markets as well as finely as we possibly could. So, for example, we ended up working with about a half dozen guide wire companies. Now, guide wires are all the same? Well, actually, no. There are many different varieties. And so when somebody came in and wanted an exclusive license on guide wires, period, we said, no, we'll do an exclusive on this little narrow segment, which is where you are strong. And I won't go into all the details of the negotiations, but they always came out well because they recognized the value we contributed, and we were realistic about how we set up the deal with them so that they were protected, and yet at the same time, we were able to then use that technology and that licensing approach in many, many different markets. And to maximize the value, we asked them for money up front, not a huge amount, but we wanted a commitment up front. Are you really serious? Show us some money, help us get started. And then set up a minimum royalty scheme so that if you just took this product and put it on the shelf, then you could do that, but you still had to pay us royalties, a minimum royalty. And that pushed away people who were just trying to lock up a whole portfolio of technologies so that either their competitors couldn't get at it or their competitors could not license exclusively from us. So, and that worked quite well. Our next big challenge was we're in a market that's getting very attractive. People are seeing the value in it. There are lots of polymer chemists out there who look at this and say, I could do that. And we had pretty good patent protection around our technology, but there were other ways to invent around it. And we started to see competition. And that's when we started to develop the other coatings. We got into drug-eluting coatings and echogenic coatings to make instruments visible under ultrasound. So, for example, yes. And I should have said, before you ask your question, I should have said, questions anytime, please. It's more informative to go back and forth, so please don't hesitate to ask questions. Oh, the non-exclusive, exclusive? Yes, what we did there was often people would come in and say, I want an exclusive. And we'd say to them, that's fine, but you have to recognize that you have 20% of the market or 40% of the market. And if we did a non-exclusive with you, we could then go to the other people in that marketplace. So if you want an exclusive, we expect you to pay us for a portion of that market that we'll miss. And so then they usually would recoil and say, well, that's a huge amount of money. And we'd say, yes, but we don't want to give it up. But if you're willing to pay for it, we'll do that. And so usually we ended up with non-exclusive licenses as a result. And that allowed us to go to other people, their competitors in the marketplace. And that paid off a lot because one would put it in the market, and then we'd get calls from others saying, can we do that too? Sure, we'd love it. And so that worked as part of that strategy. That worked out quite well. Thanks for the question. And again, don't hesitate to ask questions. And I tend not to scan the audience terribly well, so don't hesitate to just wave, wave good and strong. So as we began to look ahead and see competition building in this marketplace, we pushed ourselves pretty hard to look beyond where we were. We were primarily in slippery coatings. We started to get into drug-eluting coatings, echogenic coatings, which are coatings that trapped air on the surface of a medical device so you could see it under ultrasound rather than having to use radiation. And the last area which when we sold the company was just in development, it was microarray coatings because we had invented a new way of polymerizing on the surface of a medical device or a glass slide, and that was leading into that area. Unfortunately or fortunately, we sold the company at that point, and the buyer has, I don't know whether they're using that now or not developing it. If they are, it's going ahead very quietly. All of our growth in new products was self-financed from profits. We were quite profitable at that time, and we looked back on it later and said, you know, we could have done this a lot better and a lot faster if we'd brought in outside investors. But I had 6 partners, and there was a lot of controversy among that group about how big the pie can be versus what share of the pie I want. And that always becomes a challenge when you've got a large number of partners who are active in the business. Some have a very dim view of how big that pie can get, and they want to preserve their piece of it, and others have a big vision of how big the pie can get, and they're willing to take a much smaller slice because they see that smaller slice being worth a lot more. And I don't know of any way to resolve that except by discussion. Another thing that we did was look at some of the people who had complementary technologies, and that led us to grow by acquiring a Dutch company. It had a high-speed, patented, very well-protected technology for putting Teflon coating on wire, and they could do it thousands of feet per minute, which turned the Teflon coating part of the market upside down. And they're still going strong, wonderful company in the Netherlands. And their culture was very much like ours, which made it very, very easy to work with them. And we worked out a deal with they were owned by a major European company, and we ended up buying them to complement our product line. It also helped us build our European sales activity. A large part of our European sales activity was me, and I was getting awfully tired of 13 weeks a year in Europe. It puts a strain on your family. The next big challenge was, actually this came at about the same time we were buying the Dutch company, and that is 2001 was a downturn. And in our business, you'd expect, well, this isn't going to affect us. It did. Because at this point, about a third of our revenue still was R&D development agreements with medical device companies. And they pulled back. They pulled back big time. Our revenue dropped by about a third in that 2001 period. And that's I think the hardest challenge I've ever faced. I've terminated people for cause. Poor performance. This is the first time ever, and I hope it's the last time I've ever had to lay off people not because they weren't doing well, but because we weren't doing well. And we were struggling, but we had to. It was a matter of do we hang on to everybody until the company goes down, or do we cut back and preserve the company and then rebuild it? It turned out we probably did it a little too slowly because we didn't want to, but we ended up having to do it, and by the end of 2002, we were climbing right back up again. So it turned out well, and we did bring a few of those people back. Others had gone on to other things. In 2002, we began to be approached by people who were interested in buying the company. And I was one of the youngest. I was the second youngest of the partners. Several of my partners were already in their late 60s. And they said, well, let's take this seriously. So we started to talk with the potential acquirers in the medical device industry and suppliers to the medical device industry, and a couple of VCs came knocking on the door as well. We decided the best thing to do at that point was to hire an investment bank, and with experience in the medical device field. We picked a small boutique firm out of New York City. We actually interviewed several companies to talk with them. We found one that had a woman who was a partner who was an MD. She had never gone past getting the MD degree. She had then gone to Columbia to get an MBA and then had gone into investment banking. And so she knew our field quite well. She knew the people in it, the companies in it, and she was a tremendous asset working with her in selling the company. At the same time, we solicited angel investments. For the first time ever, we solicited angel investments, and we did that because we wanted to have a cash reserve, because at this point we were pumping every bit of profit that we had back into product development and growth of the company. And I didn't want to scale that back so that we didn't have funds. If there was a hiccup and we had a buyer on the doorstep and they say, whoa, look at this, your cash position is really poor, then we would have been in a poor bargaining position. So we set up the strategy of bringing in extra money, angel investors. They got a short-term turnaround. It was a little over a year that we held their money, and they got a 40% return. So they made out pretty well. We made out very well because we were able to continue the growth of the company and put it in a position where we could bargain strongly with the buyers, and we ended up selling it very nicely to Angiotech Pharmaceuticals. So that's the STS Biopolymers story. I'll skip a slide. I can come back to this lessons learned, but I'm due to time, let me go on, and then I'll come back to this if there's time afterward. Yes?
Just one clarification. Your audience might appreciate knowing over what time frame between the time of the coding the first guide wires to, let's say, even the Angiotech buyout. Remind us.
That was about 9 years, David. And that needs a little bit of explanation. It could have been a lot faster, but for the first several years, frankly, we were a lifestyle company. We were making a lot of money and having a lot of fun and weren't pushing ourselves very hard. It was only when we started to think about, well, you know, we do have to think about retirement sometime. And that changed our whole motivation and the way we approached it, and we pushed it a lot faster and a lot harder at that point. After leaving STS Biopolymers, I retired for 5 weeks and realized, go ahead.
So within those 9 years, you actually went through the FDA licensing for?
Well, we never had to go through the FDA. Our customers did. So we had to set up all the background things within our plant that would protect them. And they were very careful about inspecting, our customers were very careful about inspecting us to FDA standards, but we did not have to meet the FDA standards. But we had to indirectly, but we didn't have to do all the filings. We did, actually, I'll take that back. We did for one product, this is a side story, we created an echogenic needle under our own brand name. And I can come back to that later if there's time, if there's interest in learning more about that. There are all kinds of little interesting side stories. One of the things I didn't cover in this is focus. It's so important. And we learned that the hard way. We discovered that our coating for medical devices made a wonderful coating for boats to make them go better in the water. It also made a wonderful base for nail polish. And we got into those markets. We didn't know a damn thing about those markets. It was the stupidest thing we could have done. We blew $500,000 and finally realized, you know, we've just been pouring money into this. We don't know what we're doing. Stop. We know the medical device industry. Focus on that. And that was part of that transition from lifestyle, we're having fun, to let's get really serious about growing this business. After we sold the business, as I said, I retired for 5 weeks. My wife is not very happy about my decision. I told her I'm not emotionally ready to retire. It's just not, it's not me yet, sometime. And so David Hessler, who's here, and Paul Wettenhall, who was the president of High Tech Rochester, invited me to join as an entrepreneur in residence. And that gave me the opportunity to work with a large number of entrepreneurs, would-be entrepreneurs, many of whom were at the University of Rochester. And I helped start and was the CEO for a while of a company called Definity Genomics, which Rich Newman referred to. We've recently hired a new CEO for that company. He's very dynamic. He knows the industry a lot better than I did, and he's really pushing it hard. And you'll hear some more good things about that company in the next few months. It's really starting to roll very nicely. In the meantime, because I had some background in the membrane field and had been involved in starting, either directly or indirectly involved in starting several companies, my longtime friend Duncan Moore asked me one day if I'd be a coach for a team that was at the University of Rochester. They had developed a new approach to membrane technology. And I said, sure, I'll take a look at it. Once I looked at what they had, I said, I don't want to be a coach. I want to be part of this. This is incredible. And I won't spend a lot of time talking about what they have, but this one slide really illustrates it very well. In the 1950s, polymer membranes were created. They were basically for micron-size separations. And the A picture on your left is a cross-section. It's not a true cross-section, but it's a representation of what a membrane, a traditional membrane, polymer membrane, looks like. It's like a huge sponge, and it has this tortuous pathway that you pass materials through, and you trap a lot of materials. That was fine when you're working with things at the bacterial level and larger. We're now working in proteins and viruses and nanotubes and much smaller things, in addition to those things. That we haven't left all those other things behind, but there's now a need for a much more precise membrane technology. The Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at the University of Rochester, working with silicon, non-traditional approach, they had come up with this way of creating, this wasn't what they were trying to do, but this is serendipitously what they ended up with, is a very, very fine membrane made out of silicon. And it's so fine that it's 1/10,000th, the thickness of it is 1/10,000th the thickness of one of your hairs. So that gives you a sense. If you held it up sideways like this, you would not see it. It's so thin that when you hold it like this, if you get the light reflecting on it just right, you can see it, otherwise you can't see it. And the pores in that membrane are in the nanopore range. They're 7 nanometers, 15 nanometers, 25, 40, they can be dialed in to get the diameter you want. So this is now a tool for things, for example, like fractionation of protein. You have 2 different proteins that are close in size. You can now, using this technique, instead of the very, very difficult and expensive chromatography techniques, you can go to a simple filtration technique. And we're getting ready to roll this product out on the market. We're facing the same challenges, but there's the one big different challenge that comes with the university technology, and that is there a market? We were fortunate with STS Biopolymers, the market came to us. This is a case where we've got this incredible technology. This is so true of so many of the university technologies I've seen. This incredible technology, and it's so exciting. Yeah, but will anybody buy it? The fact that it's so exciting to the scientists means to them that this has got to be a winner. Not necessarily so. And so our first challenge was to go through a market opportunity assessment. And let me put a short plug in for High Tech Rochester. This is something they do all the time. They help scientists, engineers, entrepreneurial people, anybody with an idea, to go through and look at, here's what I've come up with. Is there really a market for it? Will people want to buy it? And you go through the assessment of what is its value relative to what's out there. Can you protect the value? Can you entice people to buy it? Why will they want to buy it? Does it add value to what they're doing? And if it does, is that value addition strong enough to warrant the cost that you're going to have to put on it, or to warrant the cost plus a really nice profit to make it a really strong entrepreneurial venture? we went through a whole list of, and this is only a partial list of the things that we looked at for this membrane application. We think a lot of them will be ultimately markets for us, but what we ended up doing was focusing on a few where we were able to prove to ourselves and to others that there truly is strong added value, and these are markets that we can get into very, very quickly because they're non-regulated and because we've got the material and the market expertise in these areas. The other areas we don't. We're going to have to turn to other people. But these are 3 products that we'll be coming out with in the near term. The TEM Windows is like a microscope slide for transmission electron microscopy, and we'll introduce that tentatively on the 15th of December, 14th or 15th of December. SEPCON is a protein fractionation separation device, which is in a plastic housing, and I try to carry one around in my pocket. It looks like this. It's a 1.5 ml centrifuge tube for those of you who are in biology and sciences that use these, with a little membrane filter in it. It's ubiquitous, but it's never been done at the protein separation level. And cell culture substrates, no need to get into all the detail, but these are 3 bio-research markets, no regulatory barriers, markets we know. We've done our research talking with scientists, with researchers who use these things. We've priced them out versus the competition, versus the value of this technology in this application against what it costs them now in time and dollars to do similar things in the marketplace. So that was the big challenge that's different from the challenge that we had in STS biopolymers. The rest of the challenges, and I'm not keeping track of time, so Ted, if you can help me out with this, if I'm getting short, let me know. The rest of the challenges are pretty much the same as we faced in STS biopolymers. We had to build a foundation. It's a brand new company. We didn't have the base that STS biopolymers had, the parent company that we had started as a service company. So we have to start the company and get it started. We initially funded it the traditional way, founders, family, friends. We had to get a license from the University of Rochester. There are 3 patent applications pending, and they're the property of the University of Rochester. The inventors are faculty and students at the university, and so the relationship with the University of Rochester has been wonderful. They recognize the value in what was invented. They recognize the need of putting together a company that has the entrepreneurial approach to get this into the market and work with other people. And so doing a license agreement went fairly quickly and fairly easily. I'd had experience with the Office of Technology Transfer previously, so I had a good sense of what they needed and what they wanted, and so it was all very reasonably done and very, very quickly. We do have to develop and license additional IP. We were talking yesterday with them about some additional IP that we've jointly developed now between the company and university faculty, and that gets a little tricky, but yes?
How long did it take, with all the positives that you mentioned, how long did it take to complete the license?
To complete the license?
Yes.
Oh, I've forgotten now, because it wasn't a difficult thing, so it doesn't dwell in my mind, but it was probably a month or 2.
Really?
Yeah, relatively painless. You know, there was some pushing and shoving because the university needs to protect its position and make sure it gets something from this as well. And we recognized that. We wanted to get it going. The objective was not to try to get as much as we possibly could. The objective was to get this thing off the ground and running. And so the university owns a part of the company. That's great. That means our interests are aligned. And they will get royalties as we sell material. In fact, we've already paid them a little bit in royalty because we've sold some experimental materials. So it's working well. We're very, very pleased, and they've been very, very helpful. The next big challenge we have is to build production. And this is something that I've seen so many times where a scientist says, well, I did it once, so I'm sure we can do it many, many times. It doesn't work quite that easily, and we're struggling with that right now. Frankly, I think we're half pregnant. We're in between being a lab company, producing things in the lab, and producing things in a production mode. And part of my job is to teach some of these young scientists about QA, QC, and production, standard operating procedures, protocols, and it's really interesting and fun. And the good part of it is that this is one of the reasons I signed on with this group is that they are very eager to learn. They understand that there's a lot to learn, and you don't learn it by reading a book. You start talking to people like me and other people that we bring in who have done it, who know how to get it done and know how to get it done efficiently. And they're like sponges, these young scientists. They're a generation and a half younger than I, and they're just like sponges. They're just taking all this in and internalizing it. It's just so exciting. Now we're facing, these are challenges that we're facing as we look ahead. We're getting ready to introduce the first product, and then we have to position for growth. To get that started, we've recently done an angel investment round, and we were very, very fortunate. There was a lot of, it's easy for people to envision how our product can fit in the marketplace, and the fact that it is a platform technology that can go into many other things. So we were able to do a fairly significant angel investment round in Rochester, and that's wonderful, especially looking back a few months now, or looking to this, from this month looking back. If we had done it today, it probably would not have happened because of the economy. And we're in a position where our burn rate, current burn rate, means we've got a long run period before we have to go cash flow positive. And so we're in a great position to really get this company off the ground. We have to do more on the market opportunity assessment. We're fine-tuning our understanding of those segments of the market that we're going into. So it's not a matter of, okay, we did it once and we stopped. We're continuing to go out with samples to people in the marketplace, talk with them, refine, get a better understanding, so that we can focus our selling effort better to make sure we get traction in the market as quickly as possible. We have to strengthen our IP position. We think it's pretty good, but we're going through a review right now. And we're just starting to recruit for people who know the membrane technology marketplace from a marketing viewpoint. We need strength there. That's our weakest point at this stage. The next challenge is breaking into the market. And this is one of the toughest things. And it seems like, oh, you've got something really good, it should just go by itself. It never does. You've got to find the customers. You've got to convince them. And we'll take the same approach we took with STS Biopolymers. We've already started drafting publications, white papers. We've got some scientists at Cornell, at Rochester, who are writing small testimonials about our product that we can get out into the marketplace. We're going to focus on small science meetings. What I found in my past experience selling a science-based product is you're better off going to a small meeting where there's more focus, more attention by the scientists who are involved, and setting up little seminars for them so that they come in. You might get 30 people, and you compare that to the MDM meeting where you might have 200 leads at your booth. Most of those leads aren't worth anything. The 30 people who show up at your seminar came there because they wanted to learn about what you're doing, and many of them are going to be very interested in it. So that's part of the process we're going through. That leads to leads, and then direct calls, and the sales cycle, which for this product should be a lot shorter than it was for the STS Biopolymers coating technology. Then we get into accelerating the growth, and the question will be, in a year or so, do we self-finance, or do we need to raise additional funds? That depends on how quickly we get traction in the marketplace, how quickly we can generate cash flow. We don't know yet, but we have to position ourselves for either approach. Obviously, we'd prefer to do self-financing if we can, because that means we have to give up less of our own ownership of the company. But we're realistic. If this is going to be a big success, then we've got to have the money one way or the other. And if we have to get outside funding, additional outside funding, we will go ahead and do that. We have to continue looking for people, good people, great people who are passionate and really want to work at this, and give them an ownership position in it as well. I shouldn't say give it, but put them in a position to earn ownership position so that when we get to the end point, which is what we're heading for, that they get a reward as well. We have to develop and acquire more IP, and then we get into the sub-licensing. We're going to take the same kind of approach here. This is now getting, well, let me go on to another slide to talk about that. The licensing approach, I mentioned that we're going to go after 3 products, the bio-research products that we know quite well, we know the market quite well, but there are a number of other ones. Like, for example, we've shown in theory that this membrane, because it has 1,000 times greater airflow than a conventional membrane does. You can probably, we haven't proven this, but this is one of the things we're going to pursue. You can probably use this in a hazmat air mask. So instead of having this huge dense filter, which is so dense that you can't breathe through it, it has to be powered, you have to carry a power pack on your back. Now picture just a mask that seals over your face and has a little breathing area. You can aspirate or respirate through this membrane. The airflow is so thin that you can respirate through it, and yet you can still take viruses out. You can take spores out of the air. So natural aspiration, this is something a soldier could carry in a little kit, just whip it out, put it on, and you've got a protective device, rather than having to flee the battle area or whatever it is, the hazardous area, and go for respirator equipment. So those are one of many things. We don't know anything about those markets. Our objective there is to get traction in the markets we know and hire some people in marketing who know the membrane filtration market applications in all of these other areas that we don't know, and start pursuing them for licensing, very much like we did for the medical coating business. And again, we'll try to very selectively and narrowly license so that we can maximize the value for the company and the investors. The other challenge for accelerating growth is developing new products, and that's something that we have the good fortune of having some outside funding that's helping do this. We're already looking at a couple of new product areas, but we're doing those with people on the side. The core group is focusing on those 3 products that we need to get in the marketplace. One of my mantras is focus, focus, focus. We ran into trouble at STS Biopolymers because we started getting excited about all these other things we could do, and didn't grow as quickly as we could until we came back to our focus, which was the medical device field. The ultimate objective here, because we have investors, not only those of us who started the company and our friends and family, but we've brought in 20 plus angel investors from Rochester, the Rochester area. We've committed to them that we're going to sell this company or have an exit strategy in some form, IPO or sale. Sale to somebody else is much more likely. There are a number of candidates out there who work in the membrane filtration field, in the protein separation field, in the life sciences fields that we're in. It's way premature to figure out who an ultimate buyer might be, but that's got to be our end focus. We have to set this up so that our investors get their return. That's why they're in it. They have faith in us. We promised that we would get to an end point where they would get a nice return. You know, it's a high risk, they know that, but the objective for them was to put money in that will then have a nice return. We also have, personally, we have the objective of growing something in Rochester. We intend to keep the membrane production, no matter how much we license out the applications, we intend to keep all of membrane production within house, within our company. We will not let anybody else manufacture the membranes. They can manufacture devices using the membranes. We will manufacture the membranes. And the intent is to grow something in Rochester and provide continuing employment for some of my co-founders who, as I said, are a generation and a half younger than I. So they're in tune with selling the company, but they want to sell it and stay with it. And also that we believe will help recruit people to come into the company. And also we hope it will help Rochester, because we feel like we owe Rochester and upstate New York a great deal. We've taken a great deal from them. That's the end of my prepared slides, and I have no idea how much time we have left.
We have time for some questions.
We do.
And I have one.
Okay.
We've been fortunate enough to work with Rick this semester with Synfor and the technology, and have gotten an idea of the business strategy. In addition to wanting to do the manufacturing in the Rochester area, economic development, all that good kind of stuff, the other sort of magic here is that they're getting very strong intellectual property protection through patents, but also by doing the manufacturing themselves, they're able to maintain
Oh, yes. You know, I didn't bring a slide for that, but let me try to do it orally. It's a very interesting process. The inventor was a graduate student at the University of Rochester, and he was working in the electrical and computer engineering department. He was doing experiments with silicon disks that are used for microelectronics for integrated circuits. And he was working on, as part of his dissertation work, he was working on characterizing materials and what would happen to them if you did different things to them. And he did some crude etching where you etch away parts of the silicon. But he did that after having put layers of different materials on the surface. So he did the etching in a way that he ended up with other materials left behind and areas of the silicon taken away by the etching process. And he discovered in some of the materials he was working with that he ended up with this very, very fine membrane. Now, when I say membrane, I'll make a distinction between membrane and membrane filter. Membrane, in this case, was amorphous silicon. The embodiment that we're working with now was amorphous silicon, and so it was just this very, very thin film. But he then discovered, when he did some other experiments, that by treating it in different ways, he was actually forcing the silicon, which was amorphous at that point. Amorphous means it doesn't have a crystalline structure at this point. By treating it in certain ways, he was starting to form crystals in the silicon. And so this smooth sheet of silicon, when it started to in a sense contract to form crystals, formed voids. So because once you start pulling away from one area to form a crystal here, then you end up with nothing in between. And these voids ended up being very round nanopores. And once he'd developed the process to the point where he could stably do this, he then took it to the biomedical engineering department and said to them, you know, I know enough about biology to think this might be interesting. And they took a look at it and they said, wow, yes, this is incredible, if this really works. And so they spent a couple of years doing a lot of testing and work with it, and ended up publishing a paper in Nature in February of 2007, which, as many of you know, Nature is one of the premier publications in the science industry, and it's generated a lot of publicity for the university in this field. It's also helped strengthen a group called the Nanomembrane Research Group, which is a combination of people from the electrical and computer engineering department and the biomedical engineering department, who are continuing to work in this field, and we work closely with them. And the university's been very good about keeping that cooperative relationship going, while working very hard also to avoid any legal and especially tax conflicts that might occur from it. So I got a little bit away from what you asked me to answer, but in terms of the process itself, it's a very simple. You start with a 4-inch or a 6-inch silicon disc. You put a coating on both sides. You do a simple pattern etch, very, very inexpensive. It's not like doing a microprocessor, which has very, very fine lines. This is relatively gross by comparison. And the masks, for example, that run from $10 to $300 to do the masks for the etching, whereas when you get into microelectronics, you're talking about what, Duncan, what, 10,000 maybe? Yeah. So it's a totally different scale. You etch away part of the silicon. You then put a pure silicon, you put a silicon oxide layer on top of it. You put a pure silicon on top of that, and then put another silicon oxide layer on top of that. And the silicon layer that's sandwiched in is what ends up being the membrane. And at that point, it's, as I said, it's amorphous. It's not a crystalline structure. Then you go through the process, the magic, the secret sauce that turns it into a crystalline and porous structure, and then etch away the protective layers that are around it. And you end up with and I pulled this out of my pocket a moment ago. It's something you would have great difficulty seeing from there, but this is a 1.5 ml centrifuge tube. There's an insert, a plastic insert that we're having made locally in Rochester that fits inside that. And at the bottom, you can probably see a dark area from where you are. That dark area is a little piece of silicon disc, silicon wafer, that's been cut out of a big wafer. And in that wafer are these tiny little slits And those tiny little slits look like it's just like holes, but they're in fact the very, very fine membrane that's been created by this process. And it's relatively inexpensive to do. These things, millions of these things are sold every year with traditional polymer membranes in them. And they sell for several dollars each. They are not good at doing separations. And this does, and it can be used in exactly the same way. This is one of the beauties of it. It's a drop-in replacement for what's out there. You can drop it right in a centrifuge tube and use it the same way you've always used it, but now you can do a lot more with it. So you can probably see I get excited about this. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned that High-Tech Rochester was instrumental in getting Seaport's kind of initial market opportunity assessment.
Actually, I didn't say that. I said they do a really wonderful job at it. In a sense, they did because I'm an entrepreneur in residence at High-Tech Rochester, and I used their model for approaching this.
I see. Well, can you comment on, given your long association with High-Tech Rochester, can you comment on kind of what the sweet spot might be for delivering this kind of business assistance to emerging technology companies? What I'm saying is it took kind of a more involved assessment to get the same level of detailed understanding of customer needs for simple labor. Is that something that High-Tech Rochester can help with, or is it more in the earlier stages of market opportunity assessment?
I'll answer it, or I'll invite David if you would like to answer this. Would you prefer to answer?
Well, let me just make a couple comments.
It might be worth repeating the question. Could everybody hear what the question was?
I think it's about
Market opportunity assessment.
to say replicating the simpler process, especially at the front end stage, and how can we help? We are trying to do this. We lack domain expertise. Obviously, Rick was a unique capability, so he did his own opportunity assessment, but he was able to be married to these technologies because of his position at High-Tech Rochester. So we had a small amount of public money by which we could pay him to have a desk at our place. And as you heard, I have a ringside seat. I'll pull an Ed Reinford here where Ted Eglin said, Ted couldn't brag about himself and Rick can't brag about himself, so I'll brag about Rick. And I had a ringside seat. And as some of you can tell from the remarks, Rick is being incredibly modest here. The question about negotiating with an OTT, Rick has actually broken new ground so that the deals that come after Rick will be much easier to work with the University of Rochester. Point one, he failed to mention that his angel round was oversubscribed twice, which hasn't happened in Rochester in about 15 years, and I know about every deal in Rochester. To Duncan Moore's point, and I'm getting a little off your question, but I did want to make a sort of a soapbox. Duncan talked about growing serial entrepreneurial talent. I recently was invited to Nashville, Tennessee to talk about this program and what we're doing in Rochester, and we finally had helped the Department of Labor, who was one of our funders, to understand that training takes on a whole new meaning when you talk about building entrepreneurial companies. And I found myself saying that the Tom Gaborskis and the Chris Stringers,
Those are the scientists with whom I'm working.
that generation and a half younger than Rick, I am willing to put money down that they will build another company after Simple.
At least one more.
That is the legacy that Rochester, New York gets out of this, and that is and we're helping national funders to understand that when it comes to entrepreneurship and building serial entrepreneurs, this is the way you do it. And believe me, we had to color outside the lines a lot to make this happen with public money. But Rick was a unique example. We are trying to replicate it. We have that for another year. We have a Did I answer that? I mean, we're trying to do more. We have several that are in the pipeline that are of a similar ilk. I think given the audience we have here today, one of our roles, I like to say, I'm not very politically correct, is we often are the ones that tells the PI that his baby is ugly. That's what comes out of an opportunity assessment. As Rick said, very often the principal investigator will say, I got it to work once in the lab, ergo, go make me a company out of this. And we spend a lot of time on our market opportunity assessment to say, only if you go left instead of right, and that's what Rick did for Simport. His founders would have taken this in an incorrect direction and wouldn't have gotten funded. But by focusing it, it did. So that's what our opportunity assessments tend to do.
Yes.
So I have a great leading question. Your comment, you said you're trying to tell inventors that their babies are ugly. What do you do when you tell the inventor not only are the babies ugly, that they're bad parents? Not only are their babies ugly, but that they're bad parents. I want to just get your insight on their experience with working with professors who are holding on to their research that they've been doing for a very long time. They started the company, and here comes a serial entrepreneur who's going to basically take over, tell them what direction you're going, the company's going to go into. So that would be a very. And also, the second question is, how do you get paid?
I don't know the answer to the first question. The first question was, how do you tell the inventor, especially a professor who's been working at something for many years, that his baby is ugly, and something I forgot what else, but he's a bad parent. That's so difficult, and I think that depends on one individual's personality. In my case, I've helped coaching some faculty who have been in that position, and what I've tried to do is to ask them probing questions to get them to examine what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it, and get them to come to the realization. Because what I found is if you directly, and I don't intend it ever to be an attack, but they feel it's an attack. If you directly attack them, they get very defensive and say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Obviously, you don't know my field. You don't know what's going on here. This is wonderful. So they have to come to that self-realization. And I've found with moderate success that asking probing questions and trying to help them find data and information, talk to other people who understand their field better than I do, has been somewhat successful. But there have been a number of cases where I've dealt with faculty at the University of Rochester who just are so in love with something that they have no realistic concept of what its value is outside of the lab. And I don't know how to convince them. And it's really not my place to do that, because they might be right and I could be wrong. So it's a matter of questioning and probing. What was the second question? Oh, how do I get paid? Well, I've drawn a small stipend from High Tech Rochester for several years, ranging from $500 to $1,500 a month. So it's not a huge amount, but it's kind of a token payment to say we value you and we want you to be part of this. Since and I'm in the fortunate position that I did very well when we sold STS Biopolymers and another company that I was a partner in. So I'm one of those fortunate people that we got very, very lucky. And so I haven't had to worry about drawing a salary. I am drawing one now from Simpor. The deal I worked out with them was that if we raise the money, then I would like to draw something from it. And that makes me feel more obligated. So I'm drawing a relatively modest salary from Simpor. And it's not much of a drain on the cash kitty that the company has. So. Other questions? Thank you very much for listening, and as you can see, I'm excited about it. Thank you, Ted.